I was riding on an Uber pool this morning when an incredibly inconsiderate individual got in the passenger seat. He pulled out his phone and started watching videos at full volume and blasting music. "Do you happen to have headphones?" I asked. "No, why would I need headphones?" he responded. "Because you're in a car with other people and it's a considerate thing to do not to force everyone else to listen to your videos and music. That sounds like a you problem," he replies, going back to watching his video. So I pulled out my phone and blasted Baby Shark from the backseat for the remainder of the ride. If he turned around or got upset, well, that's a you problem. I had this roommate who kept using my stuff in secret. I didn't notice this in the first few weeks, but soon realized that he has been not only using my toothpaste, but also fragrance, deodorant spray, shampoo and all kinds of stuff from the fridge, ketchup, sauces, etc. It just didn't make any sense how quickly these different products emptied. He used them more than I did. For example, I only used the fragrance when I went out in the weekend, but after 2 weeks almost a quarter was gone. Since I always had to leave early in the morning, he had the freedom to use whatever he wanted. One evening I asked him about this. He denied everything with big surprised eyes and swore that he only uses his stuff. So I had to set a trap for him. I chose a toothpaste tube because it was almost empty. I took a straw and poured a bit of salt inside. Since the toothpaste had already some kind of crystals inside, it was perfect for the salt crystals to blend in the mix. I placed the tube back where it was and waited for him to go brushing his teeth. There he went a bit before midnight. Started brushing and a few seconds later I heard gagging noises. And after a few more seconds I heard him vomiting on the toilet. I guess he didn't like the mix of sweet toothpaste and salt. When he finally dared to come out of the bathroom, he was fake smiling as if nothing happened. And he stopped using my stuff after that, or at least didn't use as much. I moved into my apartment last year around August. When I moved in, the landlord made it very clear that there are to be no pets on the property whatsoever. I quickly found that my neighbor doesn't care much for this rule, as she has a large mutt that likes to howl at all hours of the night. For over a year I put up with this dog howling and never said so much as a word to her or the landlord. Last week a friend of mine told me she was leaving town for an early Thanksgiving and asked if I could watch her cat while she was gone. I agreed. My neighbor had a pet, so surely we could be partners in crime. Nope. If you've ever had a cat, you know they get zoomies. Especially at night. The cat spent a couple hours each night running around the apartment and making minimal noise. The second day I had a cat, my neighbor comes over and starts shouting about how he'll call the landlord if that cat isn't gone by tonight. I reminded her that her dog has made noise every night since I moved in, but she didn't seem to care. She said if I didn't get rid of the cat by that night, she would be calling the landlord the first thing in the morning. As soon as she left, I took the cat and all its stuff to my girlfriend's house and then immediately called the landlord asking if he had revised his pet policy. He said, unfortunately no. No pets on the property. I then informed him that my neighbor had recently adopted a dog and it had been making noise. Less than 2 hours after my neighbor had been threatening me, the landlord was in her apartment and taking pictures of damages the dog had done. She is now being evicted. This happened last Thursday. I was working on a job that we had been on for about 2 months now. I'm a plumbing apprentice, so typically you aren't supposed to be on your phone on the job. However, I was going through a pretty nasty breakup and I was upset about it. I wasn't on my phone too much though. I only responded a few times when I had a minute to do so, and I took one phone call that lasted all of 2 minutes, basically just to defuse the situation for the time being, so I could deal with the situation after work. I thought nothing of this, because my coworkers were on their phones throughout the day too. They always more or less moved at their own pace and did as they pleased, so as long as the boss or his son wasn't around. The difference between us is they felt like they were untouchable because they were all also close friends with the boss's son, but you wouldn't know it given the amount of time they spent making fun of the guy, both in texts and in person. Also on this particular breakup day, the guys decided to take an hour and a half lunch. Our lunches are only supposed to be 30 minutes long. This wasn't anything out of the ordinary though, as we've taken lunches anywhere from 45 minutes to an hour long every day since we had been on this particular job. Okay, that's cool. So I left the job site in a separate truck as two of the other guys that I worked with a few minutes behind them because I was talking to the general contractor for a minute before I left. So when I got back to the shop, I see the two other guys walking away to their cars, and I parked and went to clock out. Before I could do so, the boss's son pulled me aside and said the two guys that had just left said I hadn't done anything all day. Not true. I was running water lines by myself, and I've only been doing this for less than a year, so my speed obviously isn't crazy fast. He said they also told him I was on my phone all day, which also was not true. He told me my check would be there in the morning, but I no longer have a job. I was angry and upset, so I just walked out and drove home. I cold left it at that, but I was out for blood at this point. I sent both the boss and his son a detailed message telling them how their employees on this job have been effing off the entire time. I told him about the hour-plus long lunches, the phone use on their end, the fact that they would often just stand around on the job site and talk to each other, and the general day-to-day bullcrafting they would do when the boss wasn't there, which was a lot. To top it off, I told the boss's son separately about all the crap talking they do on him. How they say he's dating a whore, they don't like hanging out with him outside of work, and they're all going to quit when the business goes to him. Oh, and I included some screenshots of little bullcrap they said about him in a group text a few weeks prior, just for added pettiness. He said okay, thanks. When I went to the shop the next day, I found my check on the desk, next to screenshots of my texts that had been printed out with several copies for the guys to read. My face lit up with the most evil grin imaginable. I called my only friend I had at this job. He told me the guys that had been on the job with me looked like ghosts when the boss's son handed them those texts. I also found out one of the guys was apparently already on thin ice, had no clue, and he got fired as well. I guess since he was the guy's friend, but also only an apprentice, he found that he was more disposable than he thought. He also told me the boss's son told them he would fire anybody, and not to think it wouldn't happen to them too. Also a strict no phone policy was implemented. Since then I found a new, better paying job, and I left a dumpster fire in my wake. So this happened a while ago, but I still laugh about it. I was on my way home on a pretty major state route, where the speed limit is 55, until you go through a town, and it can drop to 45, sometimes 30. In this story, it drops to 45. So, I was coming down a pretty significant hill, and we all know that vehicles pick up speed while doing so. As I came down the hill, I started braking, since the town had a speed limit of 45. The guy behind me did not like that. He was on my, but so incredibly bad, I could count the whiskers on his face. As I went through town, I had to pass a fire department, and sitting on the opposite side of the road was a state trooper. Cue petty revenge. As I drove past the state trooper, I gestured to the cop to look behind me. I didn't think anything would happen cause hoss that lucky. Apparently, me. I kept watching in my rearview mirror, and roughly a mile out of town, a hole behind me got pulled over. Thank you, New York State Trooper. Not my story but my nanny's, and this happened decades ago. I caught up with my nanny recently, and I was reminded of this story. The dialogue isn't accurate obviously, but hopefully you'll get the gist of it. My siblings and I had a part-time nanny growing up, since both our parents worked. Her job was to pick us up from school in the afternoon, drive us to after-school activities, bring us home, and prepare dinner. We lived in a subdivision where my parents owned two pieces of property, one property where our house stood, and an empty lot next door. The empty lot wasn't fenced in, and it's essentially a bare piece of property. This subdivision is considered small, only 60 properties allowing everyone to know each other. My parents moved there in the first year of their marriage, and were literally one of the first families that ever lived there. Nanny started working for us when my oldest brother came into the picture, and stayed with us for over 25 years before she retired. Everyone in the subdivision knew her and loved her. Nanny loved to garden, and my parents gave her carte blanche on the empty lot. She cared for that garden so much, and we had a lot of fresh vegetables and fruit growing up. Nanny could take home as much produce as she wanted as well. One day, Nanny started to notice that her harvest was decreasing and couldn't figure out why. There were bananas that she was sure was there a week ago that were now gone. The only harvest left were the ones that were already turning brown, etc. After finding out Nana's concerns, my dad installed CCTV cameras along our perimeter fence that looked out to the empty lot where Nana's garden stands. Sure enough, the CCTV catches a neighbor stealing Nana's hard-earned harvest. It was a new neighbor, Karen, who was treating our garden as her own personal produce section. Karen steals at the oddest hours too when no one could see her. Think 5 p.m. Well, that didn't sit well with Nanny. We give away produce to our neighbors. If they ask for some, Nanny will give them away. The keyword, however, is that they ask, not steal. So what does Nanny do? When Nanny was sure that Karen was the thief, she cooked an extra large serving of dinner one night and took some over to Karen's house. Her young son answered the door, possibly 8 to 10 years old, and Nanny asked for Karen. When Karen came to the door, Nanny in a loud voice said, "I brought you dinner, since I noticed that you've been helping yourself to our garden recently. I didn't want you or your children to go hungry." Karen was obviously red in the face and shut the door quickly without getting the food Nanny was offering. She missed out cause Nanny was an amazing cook. Her son was right by the door watching the exchange too. It didn't stop there. Since Nanny knew a lot of people in the neighborhood and people loved her back, she connived with some other people to bring Karen dinner for the next 3 days. On the 4th day, Karen's husband dropped by the house and apologized for Karen's behavior and offered to compensate Nanny for whatever Karen stole. As far as I know, no one messed with Nanny ever again. Info 1. This is in Southeast Asia. Info 2. When this happened, the garden was at least 13 to 15 years old and thriving. We had more than plenty for my and Nana's family. We would typically give away whatever bounty we had to friends, family, and including neighbors. Nanny was an urban farmer before urban farmers were a thing. Info 3. We didn't fence in the empty lot because 1. We never saw the need to. It was a small development, and typically couples would buy multiple lots, build on one, and save the rest of the properties for their children when they get married and have families of their own. Even now, the area is only 75-80% developed. I reckon there were only /30 owners in total. 2. Fencing the lot would classify the property as a home instead of just a lot under HOA rules. The annual HOA dues for a home is 2x the HOA dues for a lot. Not worth it. Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed this video, a like and a comment would mean a lot in YouTube's world. Share with us if you would have done things differently, and don't forget to support the original authors with an upvote. Links are in the description. Peace out, and catch you tomorrow.